You'll go to hell if you've lived in sin. So say your prayers, 'cause here comes grim.
Back in 2006, Richard Dawkins published The God Delusion, and ever since then there's been a sort of subspecies of atheist-theist argument over whether religious belief is a delusion or not, and lots of people have weighed in from many different perspectives, and the whole thing's kind of clouded. Now personally, I do think that if you hold religious beliefs as a typical in Christianity, Islam or Judaism, you know, the main three Abrahamic global religions, then I do think you're delusional in the proper and clinical sense of the word. But lots of people disagree, and the argument goes back and forth. And lately I've been seeing a lot of more moderate live and let live atheists and agnostics getting quite shirty about this accusation, as they see it, being made against religious people. Now, I'm mentally ill, not religious delusions, but other issues. Many of the people I know and think are some of the best people in the world have various mental issues. So I don't see a diagnosis as an accusation, if you will. I don't think, if you go to the doctor and you get diagnosed with flu or cancer or whatever else it might be, I mean, you don't get angry at the doctor for giving you a diagnosis. It makes no sense for mental illness to be considered in any other way. So this is just about whether it's a delusion or not, and I don't think it's particularly arguable. And I think the whole argument, in fact, speaks to the undue level of influence and power that religion has had over our institutions and our civilization for far too long. But let's get into it. Alright, so what is a delusion? And lots of people dismiss semantic arguments as being meaningless, but if we can't agree on a common language, then we can't actually transfer any information. So defining what a delusion is really important. Now, going right the way back, Dawkins very early on came under attack and got support for characterizing religion as a delusion. Some professional psychiatrists and so on accept what he says. Some don't. Still others have suggested that a new subspecies of definition be created as a relusion. A delusion, and this is a syncretic definition taken from multiple medical sources and put together, so I may have a little bias here, but still, a delusion is a fixed, false belief held without and/or against evidence. That is the broadest, most overarching, combined understanding of what a delusion is that I was able to put together. Now, I may not be a medical expert, but I can judge whether something fits a definition or not, and typical religious beliefs such as various forms of magic, though they don't call it magic, or resurrection, or intercessory prayer, or that prayer works in any way whatsoever, karma, a soul, an afterlife, a creator. None of these claims have any evidence. Many of them have been disproven over the years through advances in logic and mathematics and science and so on. So, these are false beliefs that are held without or against evidence. So where possibly could there be a hang-up about admitting that religious beliefs are delusions? Well, hang-ups is the right word. A lot of people are religious. Religion has a lot of power still, even in our modern Western secular societies. And so there's a reticence to accept that these things are delusions. And it's understandable to an extent. But the academic objection tends to come in around that in many definitions of delusion, there's a baked-in exception for cultural practices and beliefs. So if something is very widespread or is inculcated in you by your culture, and most cultures are at least lip service to Christianity in the West, as long as that's the case, they exclude that from being considered a delusion. Now, this is such an obvious case of special pleading that it astounds me that I ever have to point that out. Just because lots of people believe in something doesn't make it any more true, doesn't make it any more different. That's an argument from popularity. So they're engaged in special pleading when they exempt widespread religious delusions from being considered mental illness. I mean, when you get a pandemic of some pathogen, you don't redefine what healthy means, do you? You don't take healthy to mean weeping sores and buboes. That just doesn't happen. Even when it's a widespread epidemic and many people are suffering, you don't redefine what healthy is. Similarly, I don't think we should redefine what constitutes a healthy and sane mind purely on the basis that a lot of people suffer from this particular mental illness. I mean, it just seems obvious. Now, there is the fact that it is imposed, though interestingly I had someone make both sides of this argument, that it was something external and that it was something internal, almost in the same sentence. But just because someone drives you mad doesn't mean you're not mad. If a gang kidnaps a young girl and raises her in a dungeon and deliberately instills triggers for post-traumatic stress disorder in her through Pavlovian methods or whatever, and she comes out into the world, she has PTSD. It's not suddenly magically not PTSD because someone induced it in her. So I don't think these arguments hold water. That someone has driven you mad doesn't make you any less mad. That the madness is widely held doesn't make it any less madness. I mean, these are obviously fallacious arguments. There's a peculiar set of pragmatic arguments that often go on in atheist-theist discussions that kind of miss the point, I think. And that's when you're arguing on a pragmatic basis that whether it's true or not, religion has a use or an evolutionary basis, or that it has a positive evolutionary effect, it increases survivability, and so on. All of which is to miss the point, which is the argument is over whether it's true and not whether it's useful. And also we have to consider, I think, that the context in which we live, the context in which these beliefs are held, is very different from that in which they originated. Now, there may have been some positive effects to religion, and we can see some sort of utilitarian usefulness in religion even today in terms of binding together community and so on, but you don't need religion to do that. Some of the best bound together, most caring, happiest, highest on the Human Development Index countries, these are the most stridently secular, the most organically atheist, and so on. So we don't need religion to do that, at least not anymore, though it may have done it in the past. Prayer and so on may have reduced stress, though there's some evidence to the contrary, making recovery more likely when someone was ill. But today we have modern medicine, all of which is tested to go beyond that placebo effect. So that kind of argument, the belief in belief, as Dennett puts it doesn't really hold water at all, and is completely irrelevant to the argument over whether these things are true or not. And if you build your moral system on sand, when that foundation inevitably collapses, as it must, then all of that utility is lost, and many people are completely bereft without any moral system because they've just taken this off the peg. Far better to start from a solid foundation of reason and logic and evidence which isn't a foundation built on sand and which is mutable and genuinely evolutionary. So there's that. There's another pragmatic argument that goes that accusing people of being insane will turn them off to your message and whatever else. So that if you want to gain ground for the atheist movement, perhaps we should softly with people, soft pedal them, treat them with kid gloves. Well, the argument again is supposed to be over whether it's true or not, and if it's true that they are delusional, if it's true that these beliefs are delusional, why should we hide that? Not everyone is convinced by the carrot. Some people are convinced by the stick. Sowing seeds of doubt, helping people realize the state of mind that leads them to believe these things can be useful, and there are many routes for many different people. But what we as skeptics should be interested in, over and above all else, certainly within our own community and when arguing with apologists, is whether something is true or not. End of line. So to just briefly recap, a delusion is a fixed false belief held without and or against evidence. Religious beliefs, such as in reincarnation, or souls, or an afterlife, or the efficacy of prayer, or that a magic man lived in the 1st century who rose from these are all delusional beliefs. And just because they're popular doesn't make them any less delusional. Just because they're forced onto people doesn't make them any less delusional. And in the modern age, when everyone's got full access to information and education, there's very little excuse for maintaining these kinds of delusional beliefs. At least nothing that passes muster when it comes to logic or reason or evidence. And these are the things we use to separate delusions from opinions, I suppose. Psychologists and psychiatrists do recognize the existence of religious delusions. That they do, they just don't necessarily consider religion itself to be a delusion. So, for example, it's not considered a delusion by many if you believe a magic man lived in the 1st century who could produce bread in rivers out of his armpits, apparently, and rose from the dead. That's not considered a delusion. But to believe that you are a magic man who lived in the 1st century, who rose from the dead and now has reappeared today, that is considered a delusion, and that seems to me to be a distinction without very much of a difference. So don't be shy of calling a spade a spade. Religions are delusions. They're just mass delusions. They're a communicable mental illness. And that's cause for more concern, not less. Zang.
Do you read Sutter Kane?